to touch on like the feeders, feed station, all of that, I actually have a deer that I'll be hunting this year that I feel is feeder shy. So I can't get a picture of him. I can get pictures of him walking by feeders, but he will not come to a feeder, whether it's a gravity or a spin feeder.
So he's had a bad experience at feeders, probably.
Yeah, he's also has a big old divot taken out of the top of his back.
Wow.
That I'm sure happened while under a feeder as a 3-year-old. But then I also have a 10-year-old deer this year that'll stuff his head as far as he can inside the tube. But we can't kill that deer. Like we've tried for 5 years now.
Wow.
Yeah, he's smart with the wind. He doesn't, if the wind switches, he rebeds. He's pretty smart.
Ready to have some fun?
I'm Hunter Hogan, and welcome to Painting Public.
Let's do it.
Oh my god. Dude, this deer is a giant.
All right. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Painting Public, brought to you by Trophy Line, where we talk everything public land, mature buck, whitetail hunting, specifically mobile hunting, usually is an effective tactic for hunting any sort of public land, mature whitetail. So today's topic, we are going to talk about food sources. So all sorts of different food sources. We have a lot of different perspectives on that. We're going to be talking again with Austin Culbertson and Chris Hammond, two major killers, one from the Midwest, one from the Southwest. So going to be talking to both of them. And then we're also going to be covering big mature bucks personalities, which is something that I believe is one of the most slept on conversations or factors when it comes to hunting whitetail. Every year as I scout, as I watch different bucks, watch different age class deer in different states, it never ceases to amaze me how much you cannot put a whitetail in a box. And what I mean by that is there is no like absolutes when it comes to whitetail. And so there's a lot of different personalities of bucks, a lot of different preferences. And how this relates back to food source is one of the major differences that really generalizes finding a mature public land buck is their food preferences. And we're going to discuss some with Austin, especially on how food preferences could be, maybe that's what that buck likes, or it might be that's where that buck feels comfortable because he doesn't get bothered by people, or he's not as well known about because he stays in that food source or near that food source, or, you know, uses that as a major factor for him staying alive on public. That's what we're going to talk about today. I have a lot of different experiences with a lot of different bucks as far as what their preferences are. And I really get into that with Austin today. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into that segment of the podcast where we talk about a few specific bucks that me and him have both known over the years, hunting some of the same properties, some of the same areas, and some of the same bucks. Pretty cool to share that experience with somebody, be able to discuss it with them on what our experience with those bucks are and how those personalities affected, how they handled themselves throughout the season, and how they handled themselves on food source time of year when you're hunting that September, October timeframe before the rut. So we're going to jump into it with Austin. Afterwards, we're going to jump in with Chris Hammond, talk about the Southwest some more. But here's Austin. Your most legendary buck. The wide one.
The wide one. Legendary name, right?
So.
You named him, so.
Don't put that evil on me. This buck, well, let's just do a quick recap. You shot him 2 years ago.
Yep.
Kind of a crazy situation. We can get into that another time. But long story short, hit him in the shoulder, puncture one lung, and then he did not die. You did not know if he was alive or dead until the following summer. And then this past year, you caught up with him, finally got him killed, and he had like infection in his shoulder and one lung, correct?
Correct.
So one lung was like completely shrunk up.
Yeah.
He's like the invincible deer.
And he had no liver and still lived for 24 hours.
Yeah. Shot him straight through the liver.
With a 2.3.
With a 2.3. Big old hole through his liver.
Yeah.
And he was alive 24 hours later.
Yep. Saw him on his feet.
That's crazy.
I know.
So
No, most people will never believe that. Everyone's liver shot is, 6 hours max.
yeah, that's the
I mean,
general
we all
accepted
saw it.
thing.
It was through and through liver. We cut him open. The only place there was a hole was through his entire liver, and he just took it for 24 hours.
That's crazy. That's the deer we're talking about. But tell me, kind of in this podcast, we're talking about different bucks' personalities. And when I talk about different bucks' personalities, one of the things, early season specifically, September time period, because that's when this podcast will drop, is their food preferences.
Mm.
So tell me a little bit about why this buck was different than most deer that we see in crop country and why you think he had those preferences.
Yeah, sure. Most of the bucks I try to find are usually in soybeans, first of all, once everything's grown, just simply for visibility, right?
Beans are king.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the deer love them, and I love them too, because when they stand out of them, I can watch them. This deer in particular was not that way. I have never actually seen him in a bean field, and he has beans that are accessible.
Very
You know what I mean?
accessible. Very close to his bedding.
Yeah, and he will not go. The only places I've ever seen him is in the natural browse and in the corn, which both of those things are over his head for the majority of the time. Whether that buck knew it or not, he was in the safest place he could possibly be, in the place with the least visibility. I just so happen to believe he probably did know it, and that's why he was 7 to 8 years old when he finally died. He was being hunted by more than just me as well. There was, I think, 3 other people total that had been hunting for that buck and just couldn't get him killed because of what his preferences were. Really, if he had preferred beans, that deer would have been dead.
Yeah.
Earlier anyway.
Right.
So that deer, he stayed in a big patch of CRP with all these different natural browses. He started every evening by eating those and made his way slowly and methodically down the middle of this giant patch of CRP into where they had some corn nearby. And then he was in, head high corn from then on out every night. And that was his preferences, and it kept him alive.
Yeah. What was your approach on hunting this deer because of that?
Well, being that he stayed in the center of a 250 acre patch of CRP, with only one tree nearby, I was pretty limited. I couldn't hunt him. I couldn't see him from the ground, but I couldn't hunt him from that tree. So
Ultimate.
yeah, it made it a really difficult deer to kill, because to get in front, you can't just try to sneak up on him out in the middle of all that stuff. So I would have to climb really, really high into the only tree in that area, watch him, and then try to intercept him somewhere where the grass got a little bit lower. On his way to try to get to that corn or to get wherever he was going, I would try to intercept him. And I had plenty of failed stalks on him. Not really that anywhere I bumped him necessarily, just I would never see him.
Yeah. He just disappeared in this sea of 8-foot tall stuff.
Yeah.
And there's no catching up to him.
I mean, finally, the way that ended up killing, I ended up, actually, both of the times that I ended up shooting him, because I shot him more than once, saw him that morning, saw where he bedded down in the morning time, was able to make a stalk on him that evening. I just now put both of those together. Actually,
Yeah.
I didn't realize I had done that, but
It was a full day
thing.
extravaganza.
Yeah, saw him in the morning, heading to patch of corn. Went and set up outside the corn. Heard him moving around the corn. Moved down the corn lanes with him until he popped out of the edge, and that's where I shot him the first time. And second time, watched him eating corn on the edge of a field. Watched him walk into a big patch of CRP. Sat on the backside of the CRP and killed him.
Gotcha. From a stand that time.
From a stand.
Yeah. But that was because he got bumped into a secondary area.
Correct.
So still headed towards a corn patch.
Yeah.
He just had a loophole in his secondary area.
Over many years, I only ever watched that deer eat corn.
Yeah. Right. So the first time, it was like what was it, like a 20-yard shot, but it was so thick and everything that
Yeah.
he just mistake not going far enough back on his
Yeah.
body.
I mean, if I was an inch behind where I shot,
It would have been money.
yeah, he'd have been dead.
Yeah.
But yeah, I couldn't quite see. And, you can ask yourself whether or not you would make the shot or not. I decided to, through that taller grass right in front of me. It was only a little bit that was right in front of him
Mhm.
that just allowed me not to be able to see exactly where his leg was.
Right. Shoulder bone.
Yeah, shoulder bone. So I shot where I thought was right behind it, and it didn't work out. So
Got him killed in the end.
in the end,
So, why do you think he had that preference? Do you think he just liked eating corn over soybeans, or do you think he was um, pressured enough on this public land and experienced enough to where he was like, I'm going to stay in the tall stuff hidden?
I mean,
Because you knew him better than probably anybody else.
yeah. You don't want to give a deer too much credit, as far as smarts.
Mm-hmm.
But if I were to give it to any deer, it was probably him. Is there the opportunity there, or is there the chance that he just was born there, grew up there, and that's all he ever knew, and he was just dumb enough to stay alive because he never left?
Right.
Or what I think probably was the case was he realized where he was kept him alive.
Yeah.
And staying hidden, staying away from people was ultimately better for his survival than being out in the open.
Yeah. So let's talk about another buck that I refer back to on podcasts a lot because he is kind of an anomaly in my mind. He was the 12 point.
Okay.
Mainframe 12 point.
Yep.
You're probably the only other person I know that knew that buck really well.
Mm-hmm.
And I refer to him in other podcasts a lot because he was hard to kill and lived to either 7 or 8 years old. We don't know for sure.
Very old.
But we know he was at least 7 on public land, solely staying on public land all year, and had a very small core area. But he was so lazy.
Yeah, this wasn't even him trying to stay alive. He was just lazy.
Yeah, he was just doing his thing out there. And yes, he finally got killed, but he also lived to that old of an age on public, which is
while being super predictable.
Yes.
But just not being
killable. That's why he's such an anomaly. So that buck had access to natural browse, like kind of some wetland stuff that we see a lot of deer feed on.
Yep.
He had access to corn. He had access to beans. Really, like, good quality stuff. Like, he had his choice of anything that he wanted, and he would eat cockleburrs.
All day.
Every day. He would get up, and he would lay down and eat laying down.
He would. He would actually eat laying down. We would watch him. If we could see him from a high tree, he would be sitting in his little hole in the cockleburrs and chewing.
Right. So we only knew of this deer because of observation sitting really high and kind of getting a pattern on him. Do you think that is how big of an anomaly do you think that is? Do you think that, 99.9% of Midwest deer are going to be preferring crops, or do you think there's a pretty significant amount of bucks that have this weird food preference that they stick to, and maybe we just don't know about them because we're not looking for them there?
Right. And that's kind of what I meant when I said, did it just so happen that the wide one was dumb enough to stay alive? Like, was he just in an area
because he liked corn?
Yeah, was he just eating corn and natural browse and that really tall stuff because that's what he liked, and it just so happened to keep him alive? And people didn't see him because he just couldn't be seen, not because he was hiding.
Right.
And is that the same way with a deer we called the 12? Or we had another name for him, but we don't have to say it. But he was just lazy.
Fat, lazy deer.
Yeah, fat, lazy deer. I don't know. Yeah, there's potential. I mean, I've seen other deer that when I have seen them, it's always been in sunflowers. Because some and around Missouri, there's certain properties. Well, there's a lot of properties end up planting sunflowers, and in certain areas, and there's deer that I think prefer the sunflowers, and maybe they eat a little bit of all of it, But I've seen it where the only time I've ever seen some of those deer have been in sunflowers.
Yeah.
And they're really hard to see. But
Yeah.
so if you weren't looking
Were they
for them,
eating them?
yes,
Really?
yeah, and if you weren't looking for them in there, you would have drove right past or walked right past, scanned
Because they'll
over
bed
it.
in that kind of stuff. It's thick, just like them bedding in a thicket.
Yeah.
Same concept.
Yeah. So, food preference could allow deer to never be seen naturally. Just
Right.
out of them having a preferred food source that was taller or something like that might not necessarily because they're hiding on purpose, but
Yes.
just what they like ends up keeping them out of the view of most people.
Yeah. Also, quick disclaimer for all our southern and eastern guys. Yes, the Midwest plants stuff on public land. It's a very common thing. I see it in comments a lot. People are like, there's no way they plant stuff on public land.
Oh, yeah.
But in the Midwest, all the states that I've hunted, there have been places that are planted that goes from anywhere from like Nebraska and Kansas all the way out to like Indiana, Kentucky. There's public lands and everything in between that do have stuff planted on them. And a lot of times people are probably going to think, well, why wouldn't you just wait for the corn to be harvested to kill this wide buck? Well, a lot of these public lands leave the corn because it's managed for wildlife habitat.
Yeah.
Usually not deer specific,
Mm-hmm.
but wildlife
in general,
habitat
yeah.
in general. And on that specific property, they never harvested that
Never.
corn. It stayed standing all year long until it got tilled up again.
Yep.
So, quick disclaimer on that. But
Yeah, that's a good point. Because some other states might not have
Yeah.
that.
even so, I guess it's back to what we talked about. And I feel like we always refer back to this at the end of every topic is you can't box them. You
Mhm.
can't box in a whitetail. You can't say this is what a whitetail likes. This is what he does. This is what he's supposed to do. There's always going to be a lot of different bucks with a lot of different personalities on how they travel, their food preferences, their toleration to pressure.
Mhm.
All things considered, whether they're lazy or active.
Yeah.
All right. So great conversation with Austin on that. We kind of dove into a lot of different areas of that topic as far as bucks' personalities, food preferences, and specifically talked about a buck that really blew our mind as far as him choosing like cockleburs or natural browses over top row crops that were readily available to him and around him at all times. So pretty crazy what a mature buck will do just based off of his personality. So next we are going to talk to Chris Hammond. Chris Hammond is an absolute big buck killer from Oklahoma and also hunts a lot in Kansas and Texas. So those are some big buck producing states, obviously. Whole different type of hunting than the Midwest. The perspective that we're going to bring in from Chris is the baiting side of things. And anybody that comes from a state that does not allow baiting automatically turns their brain off to whitetail hunting over bait because they're like, oh, you're just hunting over a corn pile or you're just hunting over an attractant. It's not that cut and dry. And the reason it's not that cut and dry is because everybody there is hunting over bait. Everybody's hunting over corn. Everybody is doing that. So you're really competing against your neighbors, against other people. And those deer do have other choices of food sources. It's not like there's just one choice of food source. There's one corn pile and that's the only thing that they can eat, or that's the only thing that they will eat. So we're going to talk to Chris about that. And then later on in another episode, we're going to talk to Chris about the challenge of when you're baiting, working around pigs, which is one major factor in those states. Really awesome perspective from Chris. We're going to talk about baiting. We're going to talk about hunting over corn. We're going to talk about big bucks that don't come to corn piles in the daylight. We're going to talk about transitioning into acorns. whenever that time of year comes around. Then we're going to talk about battling against hogs and how that is a major factor for hunting in those areas. So here's Chris Hammond. With my experience pretty much solely hunting the Midwest for whitetail, anything that I've done, we aren't allowed to bait, haven't put corn out,
Right.
don't have any experience with that. And I feel like there's a lot of people in the Midwest that automatically take a hindrance to or avoid talking about feeding and how it's like not a real way to hunt as they almost have a mind for. But in reality, when you have a state that it's legal to bait in, it seems like you have to in order to keep up with surrounding properties, with other people around you. So what's kind of your experience on that, your thoughts on that? Because you've hunted both, like property or like states that you can't bait in, and then your home state where you can and you almost have to keep up.
Coming from Oklahoma, where we are obviously a baiting state, the way I look at it is if I'm not baiting, obviously my neighbors are, right? And if my neighbors are, they're going to pull all of the deer, especially late season. Maybe it's a drought early season. But the thing that kind of helped me, I guess, wrap my head around it, one, obviously it's legal. But two, when I look at anybody in the Midwest and states that we can't bait, but we can do a food plot or we can mow down the corn or do anything like that, is we're able to do that. I actually refer to some of the bait sites that I have where we'll take corn and scatter it over, an acre.
Yeah.
And we call it a cut cornfield just as a joke.
Yeah, right. Because it's essentially the same concept. Like, you guys can't, it's probably not even effective ground to grow crops.
In most spots, it's not. No.
And so, like, you're kind of stuck with the food source of outside of acorns, obviously. You're stuck with, like, if you have private land and it's legal to do it, everybody's going to do it. And so, in order to hunt those deer and compete with everybody else and have the right kind of resources to have a deer on you.
Right. Yeah. And that's one thing. So with us, we feed year round. I do a 3-to-1, a corn and protein, just a local brand of protein there. But we're obviously we're doing minerals. We're doing all that. The deer don't solely depend on our feed, especially during the summer and the off season, and everything like that. But I can tell that when my neighbors, hunting season starts to get close and we get like that first little bit of cool weather, is as soon as my neighbors start to feed, I can tell. The amount of pitchers go down because all the deer, they know. So maybe they smell it. They see the food like on their side of things. And the frequency of the deer may change just a little bit, but I know that I'm consistent. Yeah. Once the new wears off where everybody's feeding, they'll simply come back home, so to speak, where it's now a food source. It's a food source for them instead of just baiting just to kill.
Right.
There's several areas. So like I call it the home farm, that I have the feed station that we don't hunt around, and it's located in the center part of the farm. And we just make sure that it never runs out of food to keep the does. That's probably the biggest thing I struggle with on my farm is I don't have a high doe density. It's probably extremely lopsided if we were able to actually count them.
Right.
But if I can keep those does centrally located, then the bucks will essentially stay closer to home during the rut. Survival rate's gotten better. I'm able to get deer to an older age class doing that. So it's really not just about killing the deer. It's also trying to keep them and let them get a little bit older.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So when it comes to, baiting or providing a food source a different way than planning, I've heard a lot about there's a lot of struggle with getting deer to daylight on corn because people like maybe see a video or something and they're like, oh, he killed it over a corn pile or he killed it by a corn feeder. But it's not just that simple, right? Like, I feel like older mature bucks have to get accustomed to not being there in the daylight or get smart to it somehow. What's kind of your thoughts or experiences on that?
Yeah, no, a lot of them are smart to it from the beginning. Even like deer that have grown up, like from day one, there's a fawn, they had the feed stations or feeders or whatever. They still they know that the hunting pressure or the human pressure changes the closer it gets to season because we're in and out more versus never. But to touch on like the feeders, feed station, all of that, I actually have a deer that I'll be hunting this year that I feel is feeder shy.
Mm.
And he won't. I can't get a picture of him. I can get pictures of him walking by feeders, but he will not come to a feeder, whether it's a gravity or a spin feeder.
So he's had a bad experience at feeders, probably.
Yeah, he's also has a big old divot taken out of the top of his back. That I'm
Wow.
sure happened while under a feeder
Yeah.
as a 3-year-old.
Right.
So that deer is posing a unique challenge, but I like it because I can just we can put the feed on the ground. You run the risk of running out of corn or like rice bran or anything like that, which then means my foot traffic goes in and out. But it's an active farm. So I'm able to, work around that. The truck never stops running whenever I go in to feed, and it's just in and out. That's
Gotcha.
it. So I have deer that are feed shy there, but then I also have a 10-year-old deer this year that'll stuff his head as far as he can inside the tube. But we can't kill that deer. Like we've tried for 5 years now.
Wow.
Yeah. He's smart with the wind. He doesn't, if the wind switches, he rebeds. He's pretty smart. Maybe if we were rifle hunters, we'd killed him, but
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, that side of things, some of them are feeder shy. And that's a common thing in Oklahoma where people talk about, hey, I have a deer that's feeder shy. But if you pour it on the ground off to the side, he'll be there.
Really?
So, yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha.
So
is that kind of like your first plan of attack when it comes to trying to pattern a deer that gets feeder shy?
yeah. So if let's say it's a new farm and you don't know if there's ever been feeders on there.
Right.
That's what we'll do and my approach is, 2 bags of corn. And I actually use this product. I'm not trying to shameless plug or anything, but a buddy of mine sells it. It's called Buck Candy. I mean, it's similar to most attractants, but it just gives you a little bit more to smell. So if I can put a bag of corn down on a trail, that's great. I just want them to stop just so I can know what's there. Right.
Yeah. Right. Get a
using
picture of it.
cameras.
Yeah.
Yep. But if I'm going to set up a place that I feel like I'm going to try to kill this deer, obviously the number one thing that I look at is, can I get in and out? Like that's the most important thing when it comes to feeding the deer. And then if I establish a feed site and I can't get in and out of there, like, what's the point?
Yeah.
Unless it's a feed station that's in the middle of the farm that you're never going to hunt.
Keeping deer in the vicinity.
Yep. So just to compete. But yeah, so if you got the new farm, you put corn out and you establish that site. The rule number one, and all my buddies hear me talk about it, I'm like, dude, don't let it run out. If you let it run out and your neighbors are feeding, you always run the risk that they're going to go over there and
stay over there.
Yeah, maybe there's more does, or maybe there's less does. Maybe there's less deer,
Right.
So like the buck I'm going to be targeting this year, he doesn't like a lot of deer. So he's living kind of central in this farm, and there's a giant bachelor group of 12 bucks on the north side of the farm, and none of them are that big. But when they come down, he leaves. And he'll leave his bachelor group. It's only $5 in the group, but he'll leave them. Right. And then they'll slowly come back and find him over on the south part.
Sounds like he's making type of moves that going to be a potential hard deer to kill.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, he's going to be tough for sure. Yep. He's going to be tough.
So, in these states that you can bait, and can you bait on public?
No, you can't put any grain out on public. You can put mineral.
Okay.
Yep. You can do that. And then some public's different. I think you got to have like written permission for that. So don't quote me on all the rules there.
For sure. It's different from each one. So
right.
If you were to approach public, or maybe you have hunted public some in those states where you can't feed and you're competing against neighboring properties that are obviously private that are probably feeding, what's kind of your plan of attack or combat to that for hunting public? Do you just have to like look for the right spot, look for different places, or are you just kind of like out of luck and it's just tough?
I don't know that you're ever out of luck and it's tough. I would say, I think late season, it's really tough.
Yeah.
Because for me, I do have one farm that butts up to some public. And I don't feed anywhere close to it because I've had bad experiences of people coming over and stealing stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I feed further south, and I will pull all sorts of new deer probably about the time December sets in.
Gotcha.
And from December through March, it's just new deer. And I don't know like what they're doing as far as how they find the food source, but they find it.
Right. Just traveling deer,
Yep.
probably.
But if I was approaching public land, and there's an actual public draw hunt there in Oklahoma where you're hunting some public land, but then there's residents all around. And this is, I mean, it's kind of a cheat code, but if you'll just drive around and do some scouting on the area you draw, you'll find the houses that have the feeders in their backyards. And they only have like 30-acre lots. So you're able to go in and set up, and you can catch those deer coming to the feeder, going back and forth and that. So that's useful.
So maybe public bedding, private feeding.
That's normally how that works.
Gotcha.
Yep. Is they'll bet on the public and they'll move over to the private feed. But like with the public ground that I hunt, because I have a piece that I hunt like crazy, it's hard to get to. So it's secluded. People still get there, but it's a little bit harder to get to. It's secluded, and it's got some real big timber that's real thick, deep draws. And if I can find cover that will hold the deer, that's how whenever I'm approaching the public land, that's what I'm looking for. It's just the bedding. If you can find the bedding, then I'm able to move in. But a lot of times, if you're by private that is being hunted, you'll see signs of people baiting. Like you'll be able to see it from the fence, like without going and checking that out. That'd be really it.
Yeah, gotcha. So mainly hunting in Oklahoma, I'm guessing, but even Kansas or Texas and stuff. When it comes to food sources, you guys still have a lot of acorns down in that area.
Yes.
So when it comes to now in the Midwest, acorns start dropping like early to mid-October. Is it kind of the same time frame?
Yeah, you can. I mean, it can move up, and it can be a little bit earlier, or a little bit later, just depending on the year.
Okay. So, and does your guys' season open October 1st?
October 1st. Yeah.
Okay. So, with that being said, like your first week of hunting is going to be kind of starting into that October lull time and acorns dropping time. So are you like mainly looking to target a buck in that first week? And if you don't kill him in that first week, how are you kind of changing your game plan as the deer obviously change patterns going into like mid to late October before pre-rut, and they're switching to acorns? I'm sure they're switching like bedding areas, maybe leaves are starting to fall. Like how big of an impact is that in your kind of areas?
Yeah, so it's huge, and everybody calls it the October lull. It's just the deer are somewhere. Most of the time, though, in Oklahoma, we've got a bunch of white oaks, red oaks. They don't have to go very far for the food.
Gotcha.
Right. Like, so a lot of times it's dropping right on them.
They're still moving, just maybe not as far.
Exactly. Yep. So yes, if I'm going to kill them over a corn pile or something like that, it's got to be that first week. I think now in Oklahoma, I prefer the first 5 days almost as well. I definitely prefer the first 5 days over the rut. I mean, I get it. The rut's exciting. You never know what's going to happen.
Right.
And you get to hear all the cool vocalizations and all that. But as far as being able to pattern a mature animal and put yourself in position with the highest success, that first 5 days is critical. One of the best. Yeah. Yep. And then after about the 5 days, that's when you start to get the first trees that start dropping acorns. And this is where like scouting and just knowing the property that you're hunting really pays off, knowing where your white oaks are at. And then knowing where the red oaks are at. So like I just did that video on Instagram the other day, and there's a creek bed that's washed out. It's pretty flat, but I've got 2 big white oaks on one side and 2 big red oaks on the other side. And I know just from using it as an entrance and exit, that the deer, as soon as the acorns fall, they hit that creek bottom.
Gotcha.
Just to pick them up because it's easy to get them. Right.
Oh, so they're falling in the creek bottom.
Yep. That's dry.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that, I mean, the trees are right on the edge of it. So you have to
feeding
be
station.
Yeah, it's another one, right?
Yep.
So, and in one, those trees make great stand locations too.
Yeah.
Just in this specific spot.
Right.
I can get in and out. I can do all that. But knowing where your white oaks are at and the red oaks for later on in the year. But that's what's helped me the most. If you can get boots on the ground, because you're not necessarily going to their bedding areas because they are still moving. And if you've done the scouting and, after the season's over and figuring out where the different bedding sites are at and all that, you'll know that you can get in and look at these oak trees and find the fresh, eaten acorns. And then that's where you can be aggressive and move in quickly. And that's where the mobile setups come in so handy now.
Right.
Yeah. So as soon as the deer basically vanish, like that's why everybody thinks all my deer left.
Yes.
They didn't. It's just a better food source that only comes around once a year.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So essentially, acorns dropping is throwing you back into a classic whitetail hunt.
Yeah.
Instead of over feed sites.
Yep.
So like maybe you have the first week of trying to capitalize on all of this feeding and competing against neighbors, and then after that it's kind of back to square one on hunting whitetail.
Yeah. You've got to know the trees you're hunting, whether it's persimmons and all the different oaks. And
do you feel like most bucks prefer a natural food source like acorns, persimmons, whatever else you guys have down there that they feed over a corn site?
I do, but I don't know if it's the preferred thing. I mean, I don't know how it tastes, but
yeah,
but I think it's got a lot to do with it's only there for so long.
Yeah.
Because as soon as they
probably look forward to it.
Yeah, they've got to, right? Yeah. Because as soon as we get maybe a bunch of rain, or if we get a big storm and it knocks a bunch of the acorns out,
right,
or down on the ground, they seem to spoil. And then next thing you know, they're back to the feed station sooner.
Right.
Yeah.
If you're eating steak and potatoes every night,
exactly.
It might be good for the first 6 months, but then chicken and rice might sound pretty good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. A greasy cheeseburger is where it's at.
Yeah.
But yeah, you still have to know what you're doing, as far as not know what you're doing, but know where the oak trees are at. And mainly the white oaks. White oaks are king.
Gotcha.
So
property scouting comes in pretty
big.
handy at that point.
Yep.
Gotcha. So awesome perspective that we just got from Chris Hammond on hunting the Southwest. Some crazy differences between hunting the Midwest versus hunting the Southwest, where they allow baiting, where they might not have as many row crops, where, competing against neighbors and hogs might be your more major factor than patterning where a buck's going to feed like you would where me and Austin hunt. So pretty cool perspective on that. A buck's personality is one of the biggest factors when it comes to really narrowing down a big buck and capitalizing on him. In order for a big buck to reach maturity on public land, he's got to have the right personality. Otherwise, he gets killed. And that's just how it works. So if he has what it takes to survive, then it's going to be quite the challenge to figure out everything on his preferences, everything on how he travels, everything that he does to stay alive. And so that could be different from property to property. That can be different from state to state. That can be different from buck to buck. So really keep an open mind, really study that specific deer, and really stay mobile in order to get that pattern down, which is what we're going to talk about in the next episode. Next time, we're going to talk about what mobile hunting has taught us and how it has taught us how deer work. Deer are very good at patterning people when they sit in the same tree every time, or they sit in the same set every time. And big bucks on public land specifically learn how to work around that very quickly and adapt very fast. So we're going to talk with everyone on this next podcast about mobile hunting, how it's taught them how deer move, and how it creates this major effectiveness for how they hunt. So tune in next time. Again, thanks for listening to Painting Public.
Dude, this deer's a giant.